Paradox Tinto, the studio behind EU5, recently did a developer Q&A where they answered a bunch of questions from the community. And I thought it was really funny. I thought it was really interesting. They picked some questions that were honestly kind of brutal, and then they deflected a lot of the answers. So I think it would be worth going through these, which ones they chose to kind of deflect on and which ones they actually responded to. If you don't know, I made a video recently talking about how EU5 is dipping below the mostly positive score. And also the concurrent player count for EU5 has just dipped below EU4's concurrent player count. So this is like a critical moment in the future of this game. If the audience feels like the studio is kind of responsive to their complaints, responsive to issues, taking them head on, they're going to feel trusting, right? And they're going to stick around for like future DLCs and future content. And if that doesn't happen, we might end up with Imperator 2. So this is really important. And I'm guessing that's why they decided to do this kind of like scripted response to a bunch of the most important questions that have come up. And to be fair, they did pick good questions. Yeah, there's a few softballs in there, but I would not have picked the questions that they picked if I were the PR person. So I think they did a good job on that part.
I'm Álvaro, also known as Pavia, and I'm a Castilian conquista. And I'm the content design lead at Paradox Tinto.
This is my assistant.
So this video is heavily scripted. I don't know if you could tell that. Like, I don't think I would have been able to tell before I started making videos, but they're clearly reading a script. Whether it's just like bullet points or like a word-by-word script probably depends on the context. But like, keep that in mind as we go through this. Like, this is a heavily scripted. They prepared for these questions. They responded to these questions intentionally. They're not just like getting caught off the cuff. Responding to a bunch of questions, okay?
This is a question from user on Billy. Will there be generic or dynamic situations instead of just the scripted historical ones?
So eventually, it's where we want to land this content delivery system. We already have some examples in the game of a bit more dynamic situations, like the rise of the Turks. But definitely, it's something we want to keep expanding and giving more depth in the future.
So this is a recurring theme throughout this entire video. They're talking about future content, future mechanics, right? And it's always ambiguous when these future mechanics are coming. So the question was, will there be generic or dynamic situations, meaning situations in the game where the developers didn't have to hard code it in themselves, didn't have to like create it custom for the situation at hand. Dynamic situations might be something like, a regional power taking over a certain region, and there's like an upset in the balance of power. That's kind of what the Turkish, what is it called? That's kind of what the rise of the Ottomans situation is like. There's a mini battle royale between regional powers to kind of who's going to come up on top in Anatolia. And the answer they gave is basically no. Basically, they don't have a plan for this, but they would like to in the future. So it's like a wish list item. So I think this gets a 5 out of 10 in terms of deflection.
A question from many in our community. What is Tinto's vision from the political and economic systems of EU5? And what are your thoughts on the tension between simulation-heavy and arcadey aspects of EU5?
This is a great question, and it's honestly one I love answering. I mean, obviously, it's a form of the game, so the fun is more important than the actual simulation. Of course, we want to have things very, very, very reliant on the pop simulation, but sometimes you need to have things like the cabinet action, which, of course, is a little bit both. It's not pops, but it's a limiting mechanic that it's also as a basis in reality.
Okay, he started off strong there, and I don't know what happened in the second half. This response is basically we need a little bit of both. The question was, do you want to be more simulation heavy, meaning like emergent in simulation systems? So like granular details kind of bubble up to simulation wide effects? Or do you want to be more arcadey, which is kind of like a more top-down approach where simulated elements are more abstract, right? So something more like EU4 with the mana system is usually what people point to when they're talking about this. In EU4, the idea of administrative powers is like abstract concept, but game systems tie directly to that concept. And so this question is asking like, which direction are they leaning for future content? And he just doesn't answer. He just says, we need a little bit of both. We need to make sure it's a fun simulation. So I agree with the idea that a fun simulation is the priority. It's a game. It's not, it's not just like a economic simulator. I think everyone would agree with that, and I think that's why he said it. So I think we're going to give this one a 6 out of 10.
Question from our Billy community. In Fate of the Phoenix, it seems that the Larpiness has taken priority over historical accuracy. Will this become a consistent thing for future DLCs?
Well, the nature of Fate of the Phoenix and the focus on Byzantium, which obviously fell in 1453, that means that we had a much more limited scope to work with in terms of content. However, we're always going to be wanting players to do different playthroughs with the same country. So there'll always be some alternative content here. That would be really fun to explore.
So the question, you'd be forgiven for forgetting it, was about historical accuracy versus Larpiness. And Larpiness, I think in this context, is about like role-playing a country and deviating from historical reality. So 2 things in his response. One, he makes it clear that they are going to do a content pipeline that relies like on region per region and country by country for future updates. So in this DLC, they focused on Byzantium. Let's say in the next DLC, they're going to focus on some other country or region. That's the approach they're taking. And they're going to talk about this later in the video as well. The other part of the question, which was about historical accuracy, is something that he kind of dodged by saying, Fate of the Phoenix, Byzantium stopped existing in 1453. So unless you wanted to end your campaign right there, we had to deviate from historical accuracy. But he didn't say anything about like the future vision of the game or like what priority they really do have in future content. So didn't answer the question, answered half of it. Let's give it a 4 out of 10.
Question from our Billy community. What is Tinto's opinion on the current state of EU5's UI? Are there any plans for a major UI overhaul?
The UI drew heavy criticism on launch. I think that's maybe an understatement. So this question is really important, and how it gets answered is going to be determining how a lot of people continue playing this game or not.
We see the UI as one of the most important aspects of our game, basically from the fact that this is the introduction door for the players to interact with it. We're generally happy with the foundations on how EU5 looks and feels. It is true that this game is super complex, so we of course are aware that certain areas could be improved. What we plan to do is to react to it in a way that it's not just a huge overhaul, but actually if we make gradual changes, what we ensure is that what we're doing is actually be there to be kept and used for the users for many, many years. And since we have different expansions and DLCs that focused on a specific game mechanics, the idea as well is that we get to those mechanics and then we can do specific overhauls.
So I think he answered the question pretty well, honestly. So a couple things. One, they're happy with where the UI is. I wonder if you're happy with where the UI is currently. That said, makes it very clear that they know that there are areas of improvement and that they're looking at feedback and they're adjusting gradually. Okay, so they're not going to do major overhauls. They're going to do it little by little, piecemeal, same as the content implementation. Okay, I think he answered the question. I think this is a 9 out of 10 answer. The only thing that would be missing here is like any kind of specifics about issues that they know and they want to address, or any kind of like planned changes in the future. But they didn't address that. But I think overall 9 out of 10 answer. And to be clear, we're going to be rating these on whether they answered the question or not whether I like the answer or not. Okay, so we're going to separate those 2 things out. All right.
EU5 has diverged significantly from its predecessor, EU4. What are your thoughts on the relationship between EU4 and EU5? And are there any lessons that EU5 could learn or have learned from previous titles?
I think I've got this question between E1 and E2, and from E2 to E3, and from 3rd to 4th. So it's always been an iteration and kind of like a big change whenever we make a sequel. But the key thing is that we want to create a believable historical world. And with the advances of technology, more powerful computers, we can make more in-depth simulations than we did in the past.
So this question was pretty ambiguous and definitely a softball. And I think he just wanted to put it in there as a way of saying, hey, EU4 players, be patient. This is going to be a more advanced simulation. That's why this question's in here, in my opinion. So did he answer the question? Yeah, he said every time it's a new iteration. The question was super vague, and not particularly challenging. but he answered it. Let's give this one a 9 out of 10 as well, just because it lacked some specificity.
Question from many in our Chinese community: is there a particular reason why the Chinese localization has been incomplete or broken in the last few patches?
So the sad fact here is that with the big push of content and localization for 1.2, especially for features that our players had been requesting, like the event viewer, we strained the processes and we couldn't deliver in time this localization that we needed for the 1.2.0 version. Now, thinking a bit more in the future, we are reassessing how are we working in our localization process. So we robust it and we avoid this type of issues in the future.
So this question and its response makes me wonder if there was some sort of review bombing going on from Chinese users based on this. So let's just look at that real quick. By the way, in the time since I made my last video, recent reviews have dropped to mostly negative, only at 28% positive. That's just unbelievable. But at least in English, we're still right at the edge of mostly positive. So it dipped to around 69%. And now it's at 70%, but it looks like it's clearly going to dip below mostly positive once again and go down to mixed. So that's just something worth noting. But let's take a look at the language breakdown and let's look at Chinese. I had to go in my settings to turn off the English only reviews, and because it's kind of hard to see the Chinese specific ones, but if we do that, we're looking at the same recent reviews and in total 67% positive reviews. So it's not a big difference from the English, but it's clearly bringing them down in the Chinese markets. So let's quickly, if we look at the language breakdown, I don't know if it's possible to see more detail here for Chinese, but it's in this yellow, so that means it's mixed, right? Whereas, in English, it's mostly positive, even though it's right on the edge. It's like literally the minimum it could be to be mostly positive. In Chinese, it's lower. So I guess that's part of why they're addressing this. It doesn't seem like severe enough to be considered review bombing. It just seems like a source of negative reviews that's actually legitimate. Because, if you sell the game in Chinese and you advertise it as playable in Chinese and then the Chinese doesn't work, then what are you doing?
Question from our forums. Since the first Tinto talk, it's been pointed out that the game is built on a very detailed and realistic world. However, looking at the first DLC, the bureaucracy system uses a very EU4 style magic slider. Does this signal that we might be facing more EU4 style mechanics like this in the future?
Well, economy sliders have always been part of the the core EU5 experience. But perhaps the main thing that's missing from that feature is the way it interacts with the pops. I think as we design new features or revisit older ones, we're probably going to be looking more at the simulation side and how do we expose those kind of the levers to interact with the simulation to the players.
Did that answer the question? I think it actually did. He went on a bit of a media trained sort of response at first, kind of saying it actually does interact with the simulation. Maybe you're wrong in your premise of your question, but then goes on to say that in the future, they're going to focus on simulation side content and development, which kind of goes against what we heard earlier about LARPing and that side of things. But this is kind of the core point of this video. They're trying to play all sides. That's really what I think. I'm not really saying that as a criticism. Actually, maybe I am. I think that you need to have a clear vision and you need to communicate that vision. I think they're trying to appeal to a wide audience of players, which is, understandable. It's a company. They're trying to make money. It's a game community. They're trying to make people happy. Those are two different things that are, closely related. So I don't envy the position they're in, but when you don't signal a clear vision and say what you're not going to do, it just kind of looks like fuzzy, and fuzzy's not great, in my opinion, at least. I don't want to play a game that's appealing to everyone. I want to play a very specific game. And I think Johan has a very specific vision that he thinks is being implemented, and I'm not sure how it's playing out in real life. Curious what other people think on this, but there's the simulation side versus the magic slider. There's the idea of abstract mechanics versus simulation mechanics. There's the idea of historical accuracy versus role play. I've never pitted those two against each other, but I guess they could be. To me, it's more historical accuracy versus dynamic gameplay. Those are the two things, because I think of historical accuracy as a form of railroading. But that's just like my bias. And Johan talks about that later. So let's just keep going.
Question from users on Bilibili. Are there any plans to make it easier to unlock achievements?
Yeah, that's our plan. We, in the 1.3, will remove the Iron Man and the modding thingy, whatever. So if you want to just have a mod that gives you all the achievements, feel free to do that. And if you want to have your UI mods and or localization mods, feel free to do it. You'll be able to get the achievements anyway.
This one cracked me up because Johan has been ride or die. Achievements should mean something, and they should not be allowed for people who cheat. And it's so funny to see that someone forced him to allow this. And I have a feeling it might be the localization that he mentioned. So they're kind of banking on mods coming in to fix localization for them a little bit, at least a little bit. That's not what he said, but it's kind of the subtext here. But I think this is a positive change, and I think he responded to the question, which again was like a softball question. Are there plans to make it easier? The goal is not for it to be easier. The goal is for it to be like functional, you know? I want to be able to customize the look of the game with mods if I want, and still play the game and still enjoy achievements, because achievements are a big part of how people play the game, especially, you know, because it's like a single player game and it's difficult. So having those achievements and going after them is like a big part of how I play. You know, for other people, it might be a role play or something, but Iron Man's a big deal. And I think this is a welcome change. I think he answered the question. Let's give it a 10 out of 10 for that one.
Question from our forums community. Will there be alternative map and UI skins similar to Victoria 3?
Our idea on this is that we will keep releasing DLCs, and those will be based on and focused on certain cultural areas and regional areas, right? So our plan with that is to actually make sure that the UI, the art assets of it, the units are all tied to these theme-based DLCs.
This is the point where I start to notice a pattern where I just can't help but feel bad for these guys. Like, I feel like they are overworked. I feel like EU5 is too big for this team. I don't have any data, so like this is just opinion, but I feel like it's too much for them to handle. And I think that every response that they have to like, hey, this is a problem, can you fix this? Hey, can you add this? Hey, can you do this? The response is always, we're going to do it little by little, one region at a time, through DLCs that you better pay for. And, you know, if you keep paying, we're going to keep making. That's what they keep saying. So that's a frustrating answer to hear from a player who spent like $60 on a game, which in some cases is like not functioning as expected. At the same time, I feel bad for these guys. It's just too much. Like, everything that they say seems to be like a resource limitation. You know what I mean? And I can't help but feel like they're on the defensive throughout the rest of this video. And, you know, in the first half a little bit too. I think, once again, you answered the question pretty well. I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10 for that one. But despite like actually answering the question in a helpful way, I'm not sure that the answer is like really the best thing for anyone involved, whether it's them or us.
Question from our Reddit community. The event viewer is a step in the right direction, but many important events still require things to happen in game that are out of the player's control. That's certainly fine in some cases, but in others, it's painful when you want to experience and take part in some of these important events and you're unable to. Any chance of events having a pass to streamline their requirements?
Definitely, yes. The event viewer, I agree that it's been a path in the right direction. And I think that it has also given more insight to us, the devs, for two reasons. Because we can also more clearly see all these issues that the players know, but also the players are also able to report in the forums and give us directly these reports to fix them. We've already been fixing stuff for 1.2 and 1.3, and now something that I want the content design team to do during the summer is to review as many events as possible. I also want to say that I don't know exactly, or we don't know exactly what will be the final scope of the review task, but we are going to work on it for sure.
So here Pavia is responding to a question about making events easier to trigger so that you have more events happening throughout your playthrough, okay? By saying in the first half, yes, we know that there are a lot of bugs and errors with the way that events currently work, and you are reporting them successfully, and we're fixing them. Okay, you see how this puts the development team on the defensive, where the question is, hey, we want, events to happen more often. The answer is, yeah, we know a lot of events are broken. Those aren't exactly the same thing, but it's a way of responding to that frustration without having to say without having to answer a question that's literally like, why are all the events broken? You know what I mean? And to top it off, they don't know what the final scope of the review task is going to be. So they're not committing to reviewing all the events. They're not committing to fixing all the events. What this means is that there are so many issues that they can't commit to fixing all of them in a timely manner and managing new content that is expected to be added into the game. That's what I'm hearing. Again, they're lacking resources for like the scope of this game and the scope of maintenance that it's requiring. And that's not a good sign. It's not a good sign.
Question from our forums. You mentioned that you would be adding new start dates to the game. Roughly what periods are you most considering? And are you concerned that having multiple start dates will hurt the long-term development of the game since you now have to babysit multiple setups?
We've basically discussed every single major event between 1444 and 1800 as a potential start date. Right now, the one we want to focus on, closer to what a lot of people think is the core Europa Universalis experience. So dealing with discovery and reformation, these sorts of things.
Europe. And fair enough. Okay, it's fine. If you've been on my channel for a while, you might know that I talked about how European content always gets prioritized over the rest of the world. That's what people are interested in. It's not like a malicious thing. It's just that's the audience. But it's interesting, if the Chinese market keeps growing for this game, although right now it doesn't seem like it might. But if the Chinese market keeps growing, is there going to be more of a push for Asian content? I don't know. Because right now the primary player base is in Europe. It's also interesting that he uses the word discovery rather than colonization, but just nitpicking.
Having multiple start dates does add a lot of complexity to the maintenance of the game. This is why we want to have, let's say, a small handful of bookmarks that are carefully curated and high quality.
So you didn't answer the question. He just said, yes, it does cause problems for us. We don't have the capacity to do too many of these. And there's long-term maintenance problems, right, that come up with trying to have these start dates. He calls them bookmarks. The idea is if you do a 1776 bookmark and then, it's the American Revolution and Revolutionary War. And then you change how war mechanics play out, then maybe you'd have to modify something in that start date. Or if you wanted to add locations or change locations or change some data, stuff like that, it might mess stuff up, so they'd have to remake the start dates every time that there's a major conflict. That's kind of a problem. I think the bigger question here is will they have enough content in terms of events and situations, things like that, to be able to fulfill the expectation of quality on a new bookmark or start date? That's the question. And I think he's saying not right now, maybe later, and there's only going to be a couple, even when we are able to work on this.
This is a question from many in our community. Are there any plans to further optimize the game for lower-end PCs?
Well, I don't think we're going to support other types of PC below the specs we already had, but we want the game to be more playable and run faster and have faster FPS on the platforms that we're targeting.
Johan is the king of deflecting. So we want the games to perform at a higher level on the platforms that we already said we're supporting. So we're not going to... Understandably, they don't want to commit to lowering the requirement on the bottom end of hardware, but for the mid-range or the lower end of but above the minimum specs, he just says we want it to be higher FPS. Nothing specific about how we're going to get there, right? So to me, that's not a response.
So, question from our community. Patch 1.2 improved Japanese clans, but the transition from an extraterritorial country to a settled country still feels difficult, and the northern and southern courts situation ends very quickly. Are there plans to further improve gameplay for non-Western countries like Japan?
Yes. To be clear, the experience that the player can play with these countries in Japan is not yet there where we would like to be in terms of both polish and fun. What we plan to do with this in the short term is to basically fix bugs and address quality of life issues. Nonetheless, in the future, we want to review all this, and especially the Sengoku Jidai, because for us as developers, in our minds, this has to be the experience when playing in Japan. So yes, short-term improvements, later in the future, don't know exactly when, full review.
Full review to me means DLC coming. It means you're going to have the Byzantium-style DLC, but in Japan. And that's when they're going to, implement the full overhaul that he's talking about. I think, again, here, we're hearing from players, not enough content in this region. The expectations on content aren't there. I have a whole video about flavor and content and how I think that in terms of a design philosophy, it kind of goes against a lot of what makes these kinds of games unique. But if people want that and it's not there, people don't want to play in Japan then. And so I'm hearing, unfortunately, a situation where EU5 is going to be sold little by little, country by country. Oh, now Japan's worth playing because you paid $5 more or $20 more or whatever it is. Oh, now Byzantium is more fun. Oh, now, Russia is more fun. If to compare it to EU4 had these, what were they called? Immersion packs. EU4 had immersion packs. That's what they were called. And they would expand on like one specific region, one specific country sometimes, and provide like a ton of new flavor for that country, new mechanics that are unique to that country. Sounds like that's the kind of development cycle we're going to be seeing with EU5. That's what we're hearing in this interview. And what I'm also hearing is we don't have the resources to fix this right now. We just don't, because there are so many other issues. And like, fair enough, they've listed like 100 different problems, and there's 100 more coming.
So a question that many people are probably asking is, do you think the UI in 5 years from now is going to be different from the UI now?
Oh, indeed. Yeah, I mean, in 5 years' time, there's going to be many changes. Our plan is to keep adding quality of lives into it, tools for the player to be able to manage this huge game that is EU5. And yeah, that's it here.
Another softball question, to be fair, but, a fair response as well. I think they highlighted this question to remind you, hey, don't forget, in 5 years, that's when the UI is going to be really good. We're making incremental changes already. We're already, fixing all these problems. But in 5 years, just imagine what it's going to be like. And don't you want to be there for that in 5 years? I know I do.
A question from the forums. Are there any plans to allow for multiple RGOs within the same location?
Well, no, we don't really have any plans to make multiple RGOs in the same location. However, we're really interested to see if modders can take this any further.
Oof. At first, I really liked this answer because at first it was like a core difference in like the economic design of the entire game. It's like, hey, do you want to just like change the entire game? But I guess maybe people were asking this a lot. I haven't seen it personally, but maybe people were interested in this question. But the point about modding, that's just such a red flag. I mean, like, of course we want to see what modding can do. And like, that's fair to say. But every time I hear from a big company, wow, modding could do it, that's just a red flag to me. But I don't think it's the end of the world in this case.
Question from our forums. Are there plans for adding more negative events, like the Black Death, that scale back global development and sort of reset the board?
Not specifically. What I think that we might be focusing more is to keep improving the quality of the already existing ones. So when they happen, they feel more impactful and a true marking game experience for the players, like the "oh shit, here we go" game meme, basically.
So do you see the pattern here emerging? It's like, hey, are you going to add this entire new scope to the game? And the response every time is no, because we need to fix what's already there. And like, that's a totally valid response, but I think it's really interesting how that keeps coming up over and over and over again. They almost want to manage two things here. They're trying to like make you invested in the long-term success of the game, right? Of course. And at the same time, they're trying to set expectations low enough in terms of the expansion of the existing content. They don't want you getting too excited about all these different possibilities. They want you to know that the quality of what you already have is going to be better, but they can't commit to promising new things because, I mean, these guys seem overworked. They just do. I mean, I don't know if you can tell something maybe in the body language, because I'm sure these are like pre-written answers, but it's just, or maybe it's something about the tone of the responses. I don't know. Let me know what you think. But I feel like they're on the defensive, and I feel like they're stressed out. That's what I'm hearing every time I get one of these responses about like, we're going to improve the quality of what already exists. We're not going to really expand this thing. Maybe eventually we'll expand it. Things like that. You know what I'm saying?
Another question from Billy. 500 years is a very long time span for a grand strategy game. How do you strike a balance between randomness and historical determinism, while ensuring that players still have reasonable goals and momentum in the late game?
And my science philosophy has always been to create believable works. I mean, it's not accurate ones, it's not railroaded ones, but believable ones. And that's really the short term of the short answer to this question. I mean, we're not trying to guarantee that France always gets Napoleon or that the Ottoman Empire always has a peak. But you want the big blue blob and the big green blob, right?
This answer seemed pretty off the cuff and kind of spicy, but I actually agree with what he's saying, and I think it's a valid response. The idea of a believable world versus like a realistic world is really, really important when you're actually thinking about game design for a game, not for your like historical accuracy simulator. I tend to lean on the side of dynamic worlds, and like I'm okay with randomized stuff. I don't care if Ottomans never forms, but I understand that people care about that. So if you do care about that, I wonder what you think of this kind of response. To me, it seemed valid, but I don't know.
One of the hardest problems in grand strategy is getting the AI to use the same systems as the player does in a coherent way. What's your visions for EU5 UI? Should it pursue long-term strategies with a sense of personality, or should it prioritize reacting soundly to the current state of the world? How has feedback from 1.2 shaped that thinking?
So that's kind of two different parts of the AI. The first one being that we want countries to react believably to their immediate environment, things happening to them and around them. And then also we want there to be a sense of historical authenticity and believability to the paths they take. And I think we're not quite there on either of those. I think it'll be worth making the AI not completely rigid, but more believable in the way it goes.
They know what they're doing. They put Johan saying, historical accuracy, believability. We don't really need historical accuracy. We need believability. And then they put this guy right after that saying historical authenticity. And now, hearing both at the same time, both messages, your brain can say, oh, the thing I like, they're doing it.
So this is a question from a user on Billy. Many regions currently need more flavor and more polish to offer a more complete experience. So how do you decide which region should be prioritized when receiving more flavor?
So for the release version of EU5, the 1.0, we had an organization on regions and country tiers to create the most impactful and immersive content for the entire world. We are organizing the content creation of the flavor by region, depending on each update. So you might already know that we added content for Germany 1.1, for the Balkans in 1.2, but our intention is to keep adding them based both on the region that we will be tackling in each of these updates, but also on the country tier importance.
It's interesting because it seems to me like their update philosophy is kind of two separate things at the same time. One is new mechanics that affect the entire world that, the guy was saying earlier that they were trying to expose levers of the simulation and allow players to interact with those. There's that side of things, which is like new strategy game mechanics, new dynamic systems, stuff like that. And for me, that's what I'm looking for. And then there's this other thing, which is like expanding content, flavor, situations, like unique mechanics, unique to like a specific country or a specific region. And they're also doing that region by region for each update or each DLC, somewhere between those two things, right? Some of them are going to be free. Some of them are going to be paid. Going to be interesting which one's which. I think that people are concerned right now that the overall like base content of the game is like inconsistent, like extremely inconsistent. That's why the questions about Japan are there, because they're like, hey, like Japan's quality as an experience is not up to par with something like England or, Byzantium. It's funny because as I watched this when it came out, and it's a day later and I'm watching the dislikes just grow and grow. And I'm just wondering, originally the likes were pretty high compared to dislikes. And now it's right now it's like almost 80% liked and 20% disliked, which is pretty high dislikes. Curious how that's going to evolve. I'm wondering if other people are also picking up on some of the things I'm sharing here.
Question from many in our community. The balancing changes have been a main source of criticism from players. Is there a particular philosophy behind these harsh balance changes? And could you explain your approach for balancing?
Well, balancing in a game like this is genuinely hard. It's a very, very complex, big game. But so I want to be transparent about how we're doing and what we're balancing on. We run automated testing every night where we get like full games. We have QA people who are just playing campaign after campaign after campaign. We read all the things in the community as well. So it's like we're balancing multiple things here. And that's what we're basing the balance on.
So Johan, for this part, the balancing, which has been like a massive, massive negative point, part of why I haven't played this game as much as I probably would have expected to at this point, is like the sweeping, changes in balancing where your game's ruined the next time you load it. And Johan describes a process by which the information about balancing comes into him. So he's got automated testing. He's got QA people playing the game, and he's got the community giving, complaining on Reddit. But this doesn't really answer the question. The question was, what is the philosophy behind the changes? What's the logic? What's the long-term vision for what kind of balance we're looking for? And I don't know, maybe there's no answer. Maybe it's just like tweaking things until they feel right. People stop complaining. That's a fair answer, but it's just interesting that he took this opportunity to describe the process that they use rather than the logic that they use.
What role does community feedback play in designing and reworking UI?
Huge, because actually it's one of the things I've missed the most while developing this project, because obviously when you are working on something that it's fully closed, top secret, you get so much feedback. You cannot be 100% sure up until you release. Of course, we have other tools and we've been using in our advantage, right? Like Tinto Talks, that has been amazing. Yeah, now we have what it's called live services. We go and release a game, and then we are expectant to the community so we can react as much as possible to their feedback.
Yeah, I think he's right. Of course, you don't know for sure if something is working until people actually play with it and get mad about it. But at the same time, do you see how this question, especially towards the end of the video, indicates, along with the last one, hey, community feedback, we're listening to you. We want you to keep posting on Reddit about your, you like this and you don't like that. Keep playing the game. We're still here. We're still invested. I wonder if that's kind of the goal of this video, is to just drive up a little bit of community engagement, drive up a little bit of interest in the game, remind people that the game exists, and remind people that they're still working on it and trying to improve it. Because, Paradox's monetization philosophy is like a 5 to 10 year thing. So, EU5 is expected to last at least 10 years is probably what they're thinking. And if people stop playing now, the investment will have been kind of not worth it. So yeah, I just wanted to point out that that meta context, but I think the response is fair. And, they have to do a little bit of PR in these things, right?
Are there plans to adjust how integration and culture systems work and interact with each other? I think most agree that the bones of an interesting mechanic are there in the game right now, but the way it works isn't very satisfying for the player.
We've heard a lot of feedback on integration and culture and foreign and all that stuff, and there's been a lot of ideas from the community that's been really good. The current system has a few rough edges, but we're planning to rework it. I don't know which update. It's probably 1.5, 1.6 or so, where we'll look at how foreign will work in the future.
We've gotten a lot of feedback. We got a lot of good feedback. We're going to look at it in the future. That's it. That's the response. I think that last one is a 0 out of 10, but overall, I think they did okay. A few of my takeaways from this video are really that the team is at capacity, dealing with existing problems, and they're having trouble expanding scope for new things, new content, new mechanics. Because the first things aren't working, whether it's balancing, whether it's UI bugs, whether it's events not working correctly, whether it's content for specific regions or situations not being fleshed out the way they should be. The existing model is something they're trying to improve. They're trying to get the quality up. And so expanding scope, expanding mechanics, expanding content is not the focus right now. I think that's a good idea. I don't know how people are going to react to that. I'm not sure. It's a risky move. But yeah, I just want to talk about this a little bit because I thought it was interesting. I was watching it last night and I was like, man, they really come off as struggling. And they come off as like defending something that they're working on. And I wonder if they were forced to make this video by, Paradox Interactive, or if it came in from like an internal plan, or just whatever's going on. It's a pivotal moment for the game right now, with, reviews dipping pretty close to mixed, or maybe like dipping below mixed. Right now, they're still at mostly positive overall and in English, but they might dip. They might dip tomorrow. And at the same time, the concurrent player base dipping below EU4. Let me just look into that real quick and see if that's still the case. So just real quick. I made a whole video covering this topic, but it's obviously gotten worse in the time since then. So EU5 was sitting, let's just do like a quick 6-month view so you can see it. At launch, it had way more players than EU4, obviously. And then in the last month, it has dipped below EU4's concurrent players and remained there. And it's still going down, it's still decreasing. And in fact, EU4's concurrent player base seems to be slightly decreasing. And in fact, EU4's concurrent player base also seems to be decreasing slightly over time as well. So not a great look. It's probably a really important time for them to get the word out there that they're still trying to make the game better so that it doesn't die like Imperator. Because if people stop playing, they stop making, they can't work on it. And I'm sure they have a vision for what they want to improve on and what they want to fix, right? But if no one wants to play it, doesn't really matter. And to be clear, it's not like no one's playing it right now, right? It's still 9,000 concurrent players roughly in the last few days. And it's probably going to continue, probably going to stagnate around here, is what I would guess. Oh, man. Yeah. Curious what's going to happen. But yeah, just wanted to share this with people because I thought it was interesting.